We noted in the previous lecture that there are some clues we use in spoken language which are not available in written language, such as intonation and pauses. When we speak, we typically use these clues to indicate something about the structure of our sentences, such as where one clause ends and the next one begins. In writing, we use punctuation to provide clues about the structure of clauses and sentences. For example, a full stop indicates the end of a sentence. In this lecture, we will look at two types of punctuation which people often find it difficult to use correctly, namely commas and hyphens. We'll see that the rules are actually quite simple if you understand the grammatical structure of sentences. And this is another reason why knowing more about English grammar will help you, both personally and professionally. Commas are mainly used to separate certain types of clauses. Firstly, they're used between two main clauses that are meant to be linked if they're not connected by a conjunction. Look at the following sentence, which is from a sign which was posted at a large supermarket. Help Variety Club buy a $2 balloon. The first thing I thought when I saw this was, why did they need help to buy a $2 balloon? I misinterpreted the structure of the sentence, and the reason I did that was that there was no punctuation to help me out. The intended meaning has two imperative main clauses like this. Help Variety Club buy a $2 balloon. Remember that imperative clauses consist of just a verb phrase. So these are two main clauses, help Variety Club and buy a $2 balloon, which should have been linked by a comma. An alternative would have been to say, help Variety Club and buy a $2 balloon. But without the comma, it looks as if the second clause is included in the first as a complement clause, like this. Help Variety Club buy a $2 balloon. In this structure, buy a $2 balloon is the complement of the main verb help. It's the thing you should help Variety Club do. This is clearly not the intended meaning, but without the comma, this is a structure that you get. We also use commas to separate an adverbial clause from a main clause when the adverbial clause comes first. When he comes, we will go to the beach. If you're good, I'll buy you an ice cream. Because he was ill, he couldn't come to class. But we don't use a comma when the main clause comes before the adverbial clause. We'll go to the beach when he comes, I'll buy you an ice cream if you're good, he couldn't come to class because he was ill. With a couple of exceptions, which we'll get to in a minute, we never put a comma within the clause itself. We never put a comma between the subject and the predicate, no matter how long the subject-noun phrase is. So, the tiny fluffy kitten with a shiny red ribbon around its neck played with a piece of string. The subject-noun phrase is the tiny fluffy kitten with a shiny red ribbon around its neck. The predicate is played with a piece of string, and we don't put a comma in between the two parts of the clause. The guy who lives in the greenhouse across the street is my friend's cousin. The guy who lives in the greenhouse across the street is the subject-noun phrase. Is my friend's cousin is the predicate, and we don't put a comma in between the two parts of the clause. We also never put a comma inside a phrase. So you can't put a comma between a verb and its post-modifiers, regardless of whether the post-modifier is an object-noun phrase, as in, he likes big flashy cars, she has seen the new Hunger Games movie, or a prepositional phrase, he lives in a big greenhouse, we walked through the dark forest, or even a complement clause, as in, he said that he would be a bit late, or I want to see the new Hunger Games movie. The same thing goes for noun phrases. You can't put a comma between the head and the modifiers. So in the really big house on the hill, house is the head, and you can't have a comma between the head or either the pre-modifier or the post-modifier. The guy who lives in the greenhouse across the street, the head noun is guy. Who lives in the greenhouse across the street is a relative clause post-modifying that head noun, and we can't put a comma between the head and the post-modifier. There are two cases where you can get a comma inside a clause. One is when several words or phrases are joined together into a kind of list, where we could also be using and or to join them together. So, he bought a piece of cheese and a bag of crisps and a bottle of wine. Instead of all these ands, we could be using commas and saying he bought a piece of cheese, comma, a bag of crisps, comma, and a bottle of wine. Instead of the big and dark and scary looking house stood on top of the hill, where you've got 3 pre-modifiers in the noun phrase that are all joined with and, you could join them with commas instead and say the big, comma, dark, comma, scary looking house stood on top of the hill. Notice again that the commas can go between the different pre-modifiers, but not between the pre-modifier and the head noun. Now look at this example from the cover of a magazine. Rachel Ray finds inspiration in cooking her family and her dog. Clearly, the intended reading is that there are 3 things she finds inspiration in: cooking, her family, and her dog. So the intended structure has 3 separate noun phrases, all following the preposition in the prepositional phrase. So she finds inspiration in cooking, her family, and her dog. Without the commas, however, it looks as if cooking her family and her dog is one big noun phrase. That's the thing she finds inspiration in. The other case where we can get commas inside a clause is when something is inserted into the clause which provides a comment or extra information, but which could be left out with no real change in meaning. He is, after all, my brother basically means the same thing as he is my brother. After all is an insertion which could be left out without changing the basic meaning of the clause, and so it's separated out with commas on both sides. Instead of her new book, a novel, is coming out in September, I could just say her new book is coming out in September. A novel provides extra information but doesn't change the basic meaning. Instead of my cousin, Jane, is a university lecturer, I could just say my cousin is a university lecturer and bring across basically the same meaning. Again, the extra bit of information, giving my cousin's name, is separated out by commas. But in this example, it actually makes a difference to the meaning whether the commas are there or not. I can only use the commas if leaving the inserted bit out would still give essentially the same information. So if I only say my cousin is a university lecturer, I would still expect you to be able to understand who the cousin is. This is possible if my cousin could only refer to one person. In other words, if I only have one cousin. If I have more than one cousin, and I want to specify which cousin I mean by using the name, I don't put the comma in. My cousin Jane is a university lecturer, while my cousin Fred is a dentist. This is because my cousin Jane is here a single noun phrase which functions as the subject. And as we've already seen, we don't put commas between the subject and the predicate of a clause. We can see the same effect with 2 different types of relative clauses. Compare the following 2 sentences. Students who never submit their homework on time deserve bad grades. Students who never submit their homework on time deserve bad grades. The first sentence says that there are some students who deserve bad grades, namely the ones who never submit their homework on time. Students who never submit their homework on time is the subject noun phrase, and it can't have a comma inside it. We've told you before that relative clauses give more information about the head to help you identify who or what we're talking about. This is the case in this sentence, where the relative clause narrows down the set of students that we're talking about. That is, we're only talking about students who never submit their homework on time, not those students who do submit their homework on time. So because this relative clause is used to narrow down or restrict the set of students we're talking about, it's called a restrictive relative clause. The second sentence, on the other hand, says that all students deserve bad grades. Who never submit their homework on time is just an insertion that gives background information about why this would be the case. It's a non-restrictive relative clause. it doesn't narrow down the set of students we're talking about. In terms of its meaning, this sentence is equivalent to students deserve bad grades. Students is the subject noun phrase, and who never submit their homework on time is an insertion which could be left out without changing the meaning. If we leave it out of the first sentence, on the other hand, we do get a difference in meaning, because the sentence changes from meaning that only certain students deserve bad grades to meaning that all students do. We only use commas to set up an insertion that could be left out with no essential changes in meaning. Look at these sentences. Should there be a hyphen between check and in or not? Where is the check-in counter? Where do I check in? The rules for when to use a hyphen in complex forms like these are actually pretty straightforward, but you do see them being broken a lot. When a complex form is used as a pre-modifier in a noun phrase, we use the hyphen. The check-in counter, a well-known brand, an up-to-date report. But when the complex form is used as a verb, or as the complement to a copular verb, there is no hyphen. So I checked in without the hyphen. The brand is well known without the hyphen. The report is up to date without the hyphen. This is also the difference between every day and every day. Every day is an adjective. An everyday occurrence, everyday clothes. Every day is a noun phrase, where day is the head and every is a quantifier. I see him every day. Now, as we've already seen with check-in, English has a large number of what are called phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs are verbs which go together with a preposition or an adverb to give a meaning that usually can't just be deduced from the meanings of the verb and the preposition or adverb by themselves. For example, in order to understand what hang out means, it's not enough to know the meaning of hang and of out, because hanging out is nothing to do with actually literally hanging. So the whole sequence, hang out, has a specific meaning that needs to be learned as a unit, and this is why we call it a phrasal verb. Phrasal verbs like break up, breaking, break in, set up, or check in never take a hyphen when they're used as verbs. They do get a hyphen when they're used as nouns. So in I think they're going to break up, there's no hyphen between break and up because break up is a verb. But in he was devastated by the breakup is a noun. It's got the determiner the in front of it, and so it gets the hyphen. She was worried that someone would break in while she was away. No hyphen because break in is a verb. There was a break-in at the store over the weekend. There is a hyphen because break-in is a noun. I will set up the equipment. No hyphen because set up is a verb. It's the thing I'll do and it's got an auxiliary in front of it. But the setup seems a little strange with the hyphen because here setup is a noun. So the basic rule is that we use the hyphen when two or more words are filling a single slot in a phrase. In the phrasal verbs, the final part, up, in, and so on, is typically an adverb post-modifying the verb. Compare, for example, break in to go in. And the reason that they're usually called phrasal verbs is that the meaning added by the adverb isn't very predictable. Break up has nothing to do with going upwards, for example. So you just have to learn what break up means as though it was a single verb. But when the two parts are, so to speak, squeezed into a single slot, as the head noun of a noun phrase, as in a breakup, or as a pre-modifier in a noun phrase, as in check-in counter, then the hyphen is used.